Hello neighbors, it's Brad here at eTrailer, and today we're taking a look at installing the Blue Ox base plate on a 2024 Chevy Equinox. Now there's 5 main components required for flat towing your Equinox down the road, and we'll start on the vehicle side, and that's going to start with the base plate, and that attaches to the frame of the vehicle and gives us the structural mounting point for the rest of our connections. And the connecting point between the base plate and the hitch on the RV is going to be your tow bar, and that's your second component. Again, this is the physical attachment, basically like the coupler of your trailer. This is what is going to pull this down the road. Now, just like a trailer, you also have safety cables just in case of disconnect. It's going to attach to the safety chain loops and then also the ones on the hitch of the RV. We have diode wiring, which is going to transmit the light signals from the RV to the taillights on the towed vehicle, giving you your running lights, your turn signals, and brake lights, keeping you safe and legal. Some braking systems, like we have today as the Stay and Play Duo, require having that diode wiring to tap into. We also have that Stay and Play Duo, which is our supplemental braking system, and that is when you apply the brakes on the RV, it's going to slow and stop the towed vehicle, and also the breakaway switch in case of a catastrophic disconnect where everything was to fail. It's going to pull this cable, applying the brakes, that way the vehicle's not rolling down the road. Now with this vehicle, something else you're going to want to pick up to get the indication that you're braking is going to be a stoplight switch, and that's just going to be a physical trigger to let you know that the brakes are being applied. Now this is what your base plate is going to look like when it's installed on your Equinox, and it works out pretty well as far as utilizing the grille openings for your safety chain loops. They also have a bracket set up for your breakaway switch, which is really nice, as well as a mounting spot for your 6-pole or your diode wiring. So really, there's not a whole lot of cutting that is involved. You can see we just trimmed here, and then also where our arms go, but it does sit pretty well flush with the grille, giving it a pretty clean look. Now having removable arms makes it nice to give you a nice clean look when driving without your tow bar attached or flat towing your vehicle, but when you are ready, it's as simple, just push in, give it a quarter turn, and that should pop in place. Once you hear that snap, it should be locked in. Now when you are ready to hook everything up and flat tow your vehicle, it's nice because the base plate really gives you all the connection points that you need to hook up to. So as long as you're covering everything on your base plate, you should be okay. So here we have a Blue Ox tow bar, so the arms are going to attach to this directly, but if you have a different tow bar, not to worry, you can always get adapters available to work with the Blue Ox arms. So we'll get this pinned up. Next, we'll get our safety chains attached. Also the umbilical for our diode wiring. And finally, we'll get our breakaway switch for our braking system hooked up as well. Now, as far as the installation goes on the Blue Ox base plate, the fascia is going to have to come off, and that's pretty standard for a lot of vehicles. And while you have that off, it's a great time to get the rest of your components up. Now, Blue Ox in general seems to have a lot of drilling required, and so if you're installing this yourself, I would highly recommend having a bunch of drill bits set up, as you're going to be using those a decent amount. But once it's all said and done, it's bolted up really well. It's going to utilize the bottom subframe bolts to really get a strong connection. And overall, this isn't too terrible. There's not a ton of cutting required to get this to fit, and I'm going to walk you through all the steps. So let's take a look at that, and that way you can get your base plate installed. Now, our base plate is going to attach to the frame of the vehicle and create a structural mounting point, and we're going to be removing the front fascia, which can be a little bit intimidating, but overall this it won't be too bad to do. Now, something I'll recommend is having a nice organized spot for all of your hardware to come off, because if you're installing your base plate, you should also be installing the rest of your components if that's feasible. It's going to make it a lot easier to get all your wires ran, and there's going to be a decent amount of hardware that you're going to want to hold on to make reinstallation easier. So to begin our installation here, we're going to go ahead and head to the top, and there's going to be 6 T15 Torx bits across our grill. So we'll go ahead and get these removed. Now on each wheel well, we're going to also find some T15 screws. There should be a total of 5 of them. So just start down here, work your way up. Now it is going to get a little tight here. I have a small little ratcheting 1/4-inch drive. To make it a little bit easier, if you need to, you can hop in the vehicle, turn the steering wheel to one way or the other to give you that clearance if you need to. We'll start down here and we'll get these removed on both sides of the vehicle. With those Torx bits removed, we're going to go ahead and peel back our liner. Now there's going to be a 7mm screw that kind of goes in this fashion, so it's going to be kind of tight here, but peeling this back you should be able to see it where it attaches to the front fascia. We'll go ahead and get that removed on both sides. Now underneath the fascia, there's going to be a total of 8 7mm screws that we're going to remove. The first one is going to be on the outside of this kind of air dam right in front of the wheel. So get this one removed. And then you're just going to work your way around the front. There should be, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 3 more, and then one on the other outside. So get these all removed. Now we're going to get ready to remove our fascia, so I recommend having a nice clean spot to place it. That way it doesn't get damaged. And also we're going to be running some painter's tape on the edge of the fascia as well as the quarter panel fender here. We want to make sure that we're not scratching our clear coat while removing or putting this back on. So something else that's kind of unique to these Equinox is going to be this chrome trim is part of the headlight, is also part of the fascia. So these can get very tricky because there's clips here and you just got to take your time. That's a long piece of plastic. So we're going to be using a plastic trim tool to kind of pry on this. So I'm just going to put a little bit of painter's tape on the headlight on the top and bottom. It's going to allow us to put a little bit of leverage on this to get it off without breaking it. So what we're going to do to get this trim off, these have plastic alignment tabs on the grill. Just lift this up a little bit. That's going to relieve some of that pressure and allow us to kind of pry on this without breaking it. So with a plastic trim tool, these work really well to be able to get under here and not break anything or scratch anything in the process. So we're really just going to kind of take our time here, trying to find these clips. And if you need to, you can kind of wedge one and kind of go on the other side. And there's one clip. We'll just work our way down until we get them all removed. Now sometimes it can be, they might fight you a little bit, so if you want, you can put a little soapy water solution, spray it in there, and that'll help kind of loosen things up, especially if you've driven your vehicle a decent amount, it's got some buildup of dust and dirt, that just kind of makes these hold in a little bit better. And just make sure you don't pry too far, causing this to crack. But we're going to do this on both sides. And now's a good time to go find an extra set of hands to help you remove the fascia. It can get pretty cumbersome, especially because there's electrical connectors a lot of times that while you're holding the fascia, it's easy to have that extra set of hands to make it easier on you. Now, to get the fascia removed, it's best to, once you have this part separated, start on the corner of the fascia, and there's just going to be kind of clips. Reach back behind that fender liner, and you're just going to kind of work your way from the outside towards the middle until we get this removed. Now, be careful, don't pull it away too far because there's going to be connectors here that we're going to separate. And it looks like, following our cable here, we're going to have, well, looks like this one here on our side marker, but I think we can separate it from this large plug. So there's a plastic Christmas tree on this side that's attached in. It's just kind of pushed in. So if you pry that back, that's going to separate it, allowing us to get our plug separated. So pull back that red tab, that's your locking tab, push on the center, and then we should be able to get that to separate. And with that separated, we can set our fascia aside. Now we need to remove our driver's side headlight and eventually our washer bottle, but to gain access to that wash bottle, the headlight comes out. Now there's going to be just 7mm screws holding that in. One of them is tucked straight back, so here's your horn. If you go above that, you'll see one. You'll need an extension here. We got one here on the side. One up top. The fourth one we already removed when removing our grille. Now there's alignment tabs that kind of poke into the metal, so where you remove those, just make sure that those are popped out. That's going to allow you to slide the headlight out. And we're going to unplug this so we can separate it and have it in a safe spot. So again, the plastic Christmas tree, we're going to want to pop that off. Our plug is going to have a locking tab just like we had on our chassis harness. So undo that. And then once we get this Christmas tree taken out, we can go ahead and put our headlight somewhere safe. Now our washer fluid reservoir, we have a series of 10mm nuts and screws that we're going to remove. We may or may not have to get our lines taken off. My goal is to kind of keep everything attached, that way it's not leaking, and just kind of zip tie this up out of the way, because the main thing is we're getting our base plate bolted up in areas here. It's mostly just to give us clearance. So you'll see there's a 10mm bolt on this side, so you probably need an extension. We have the nut here. We have a bolt here, and I do believe there's one more that's up tight here by the battery. So we'll go ahead and get these removed. Now, from what I'm gathering, I think what we can do just to make it easier and not have to deal with the lines and losing fluid and making a mess, I think if we just unplug these two, we should be able to set this aside and then zip tie this up. So have some zip ties ready so it's supported. So we'll pull this down, get this unplugged, and the same goes for this side here. This clip does look a little bit different, so we'll take a look at this and see how we need to separate it. Now to get this separated, use a small flathead. There's an opening in this gap here. And if you just kind of push on that and then push up, that should separate it. And I think this was the holdup. So at this point, just kind of take that off the stud. And we do have some room here. Now to get this out, it's kind of you got to snake this a little bit. And if you need to, you can see the lines are attached with the plastic Christmas tree there as well. So if you separate that, it's going to make it a little bit easier to have some of that movement. And now that does make it quite a bit easier. Still a stretch here a little bit, but rotate this. And then I'll grab my zip ties, and I think if I zip tie it up here as well as here on our quarter panel, I think that'll be enough to get this out of the way and still be structurally okay to just kind of hang in place. Now we'll head back under. We're going to get our belly pan removed. So the rest of the screws that are on the back side of this air dam are going to be included, but also just kind of follow this back. You'll see on the frame where the screws go in, we're going to be pulling this whole thing down. So work through in the recessed section. There's also those screws. They're all going to be 7mm. So if you see a 7mm under here attached to the plastic, go ahead and get that removed. Now once you get this kind of underbody panel or this little air dam right in front of the tire removed, that's going to give us access to the one that's kind of in this recessed portion. So make sure you're getting that as well. Once they're all removed, there are some tabs here that hold on. They just kind of bite into this cross member here. So just pull this back and that should allow you to remove this portion. Now head to the front by your intercooler, and this has this kind of slots that slide up and down. So you're going to be looking for the 4 plastic push pins on each corner. We also have our temperature sensor that's kind of located in here that we're going to kind of get removed. But I think if we get these 4 off first, it's going to make it a little bit easier. With these plastic trim or plastic push pins, just kind of pry on the center. There's a small slot. Get that center part pulled out, and then you should be able to get behind there to get the whole thing removed. So get these 4 removed first. Now be careful, this will want to fall off, so we'll set this aside, and our temperature sensor here just kind of sits in this plastic, so we can go ahead, we can actually get this whole plastic piece removed. So just slide this out, and then we'll just unplug our temperature sensor. It's also got those plastic Christmas trees here, so we'll get that separated. And I'm not going to unplug our temperature sensor, I'm just going to twist this around and remove the whole thing. So we'll kind of let this hang here, and then we'll set this aside. Now we're going to need to go to the bolt that attaches our cross member to the frame of the vehicle. It's going to be a 21mm socket to accomplish this. I'm using a 1/2" impact. Keep this handy because we're going to be using this to bolt up our base plate here shortly, so get this removed. Now we're going to do this on both sides, so go ahead and get the other cross member bolt taken out. Now, before we get our base plate up, the tolerances on this require us to hammer these flanges in a little bit. That's going to allow us to slide it up. Now, something you might want to keep in mind is when we pull these subframe bolts out, the subframe does drop a little bit. So if you want, you can, if you're doing this in your driveway or garage, you can put a floor jack underneath this to support it. It's not going to completely drop out, but it's not a bad idea to do. And as I mentioned before, keep these handy because as we raise our base plate up, we're going to need that. Also, I recommend if you don't have Loctite, some red Loctite's going to be on a lot of the hardware we're doing. It doesn't come with the kit, so you're going to want to make sure you have that handy. Now, as far as hammering this in to get our clearances, we're just going to try to get about 1/8 inch or so, nothing crazy. We can always come back a little bit more after mocking it up, but this whole L basically we're going to kind of massage back a little. We'll just get our bolts prepped with that thread lock. Now you're going to want to mock up your base plate. That way you know if you need to hammer any more. And the main thing that you're going to be looking for is as this slides up, that bottom hole is going to go back with that bolt from our subframe. So that bottom hole has to align there, and you'll see the cutout on our bracket that kind of fits over that cross member. So once you kind of get it in place, you might need to use the dead blow hammer to kind of get it all aligned. So it might help to have a floor jack or something supporting the hitch or another set of hands to get it in place and then really hammer it in to make sure that everything lines up properly. Now once you get the bottom ones aligned, we're going to go ahead, we're going to feed this back up. And then once both sides are in, I'm going to snug this up. That's going to help draw everything up to make sure everything's tidy. Again, you may have to kind of massage it with the hammer to really get it exactly where you want, but you can see where it's supposed to sit. It should be pretty close to flush up top at all of these spots, so just make sure that yours is aligned properly. Now it is going to be tight. The main thing you're looking for is this to slide over, and the tolerances are pretty tricky. So if you really had to, you could notch out that corner just a little bit. It's gonna make it a little bit easier to draw over. But I used a flathead screwdriver to kind of pry this back to get this aligned. Now I got a few threads started, so we'll go ahead and we'll get these snug down on both sides. So now's a good time to make sure that everything's nice and level. This should be sitting pretty well flush. Same with the top. You want to make sure it's not uneven. And if you kind of look at your safety chain loops as well as your receiver arms, it should be as close to level as possible. And double check on both sides. Now, we'll see that we have quite a few holes here, and we're going to be drilling those out. That's kind of the standard of Blue Ox base plates. There's generally a lot of required drilling. So we're going to start in this middle one here, and we're going to use a 3/8 drill bit. I recommend grabbing one of your bolts. That way you can test to make sure that it passes through nice and clean. So we'll first start with this hole. We're going to do this on both sides, and that's going to secure it, but also double check to make sure that it's square. Now be careful, there's obviously wires and things behind here, so when you're drilling, make sure that you're not going all the way through, and if you need to, you can slide a small block of wood back there to protect it. But we'll go ahead and we'll get this drilled out. Now this process is going to take a while. You're drilling through pinch welds, so if you need to, you can do a smaller pilot hole and then work your way up. Either way, there's going to be a lot of drilling, so I recommend having a good set of drill bits. So now take your bolt, pass it through, make sure it passes through nice and clean, and then we'll take our nylon lock nut and we're just gonna snug this down. We can fully tighten this once we determine that we have our base plate nice and level. You can wait until you get the other side drilled in. It's kind of up to you, but if you're happy with where it's at like ours, I'm gonna go ahead and get this tightened down. Now with these, you can choose to put thread lock or Loctite on there. The nylon lock nuts generally don't back out, so if you want that little peace of mind, feel free to go ahead and do that. Now with this in place on both sides, tighten it down. Also, you can take your torque wrench and torque it down to the settings found in the instruction manual, and those are just gonna hold everything in place. From there, we're just going to drill out the remaining 4 on each side. Now everything's drilled out and the hardware is in place, and in order to tighten this down, you're gonna need a 9/16 wrench as well as a socket. I've went and already kind of snugged ours down. Now the torque settings again are gonna be found in the instruction manual. And if you need a torque wrench, we have them available here at eTrailer. You can generally go to an auto parts store and rent one for free, but this is gonna make sure that long term, the hardware is gonna be tight enough to stay in place and not become loose, but also not too tight, putting stress on the hardware or any of the components. So going through, making sure these are all torqued down properly is gonna be key. Now, I will point out these back ones here, it gets pretty tight. So unfortunately, you might not be able to get a socket on there. You can use a crow's foot attachment on your torque wrench, or just kind of get a feel for the other ones and tighten that down accordingly if you can with the open end of your wrench. Now with everything torqued down properly, we do have our base plate installed. Now we do need to do some trimming here on this air dam that goes around the intercooler for it to fit. Now, it looks as if we're gonna need to slide this up to bolt back up where we took those plastic push pins off. So cutting along this line here and just kind of leaving this tab. They say to cut the temperature sensor. I think we can get away and leave it there. It'll still mount up properly. And then as far as this side, we're just kind of following that up as well. So it should just be this portion here. Now, as far as trimming, you can unsnap this to make it a little bit easier. But you can use a Dremel, you can use a pair of snips. I'm gonna be using a multi-tool. We'll just cut this along and then test fit it up. Now if you need to, there's gonna be a few burrs, and you can just take a pocket knife or a file and just kind of run it along that, just kind of give it a little bit cleaner look. Now, once you have that cleaned up, we'll go ahead and test this and make sure it works. Now, this does fit. I can see why they decided to cut this off. It's gonna be pretty close here, but I do think I can get our temperature sensor back in place with no issues here. So I'll go ahead, we'll get this put back in, and we also need to get our safety chain loops set up. So let me get this all put in with our plastic clips, and then we'll move along. Our safety cables are going to attach to the hole here on our side bracket using quick links, and this is going to create a just an extra barrier of protection in case all of this hardware was to fail. It's still going to be attached to the frame, so it's imperative that we take our safety cables and wrap it around the frame of the vehicle. Now you want to make sure it's not going to make contact with anything that's moving in the engine bay. I think if I feed this through here, be able to wrap this around and get our attachment point. Now it's okay if this is loose. A lot of times, you know, you can go back and zip tie it up. And really, it's just there for you know, worst case scenario. So it's not a big deal if you do go back and zip tie everything up clean. But we'll get this attached. And if you want to, you can put a little bit of thread locker on these threads as well. So safety cables are routed on both sides, and we can go ahead and get our washer fluid reservoir back in and bolted up. Now there is a spot that our bracket does kind of cover the threaded weld nut that was there previous, and we have a new bolt for that, but something I'll recommend, you want to make sure that it's aligned up so we can bolt this through. So I'll show you a little trick. Now ours was originally kind of bent back to where this was kind of at a not a great angle, and that's because we hammered on that portion. So if you need to, thread this in, make sure there's plenty of threads in that weld nut, and this little collared edge, the shoulder, you can use that and a pair of pliers to just kind of bend this out to make sure that it's a straight shot. That way when you get your washer fluid bottle back in place, it'll bolt up. Now also make sure that you're plugging your sensors back in on your washer fluid bottle as you get this put back. Now the spot that kind of sits on that base plate, now the factory one does work, but we do want to make sure that it's going to get enough to bite into that weld nut properly. So put your new bolt with a flat washer on there, and that's just going to be a better securing spot, and make sure that our washer bottle is not going to move on us. At this point we can also get our headlight put back in place, so make sure you're plugging that in. So our headlight's back on. We pretty much got everything good to go. Really the only last step would be getting our fascia put back up and trimmed out for it to fit on our base plate. But as I mentioned previous, I highly recommend doing the rest of your flat toe components because you'll be mounting up your breakaway switch, your diode wiring, and all of that wiring is going to run through here. So having that fascia off just makes it way easier. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get the rest of our flat toe components set up, and then I'll show you how to trim the front fascia to get it back on. Now we've gone ahead, we got all of our flat toe components set up, so it's time to get our fascia put back on, and it is going to require some trimming here. So we're for now just going to kind of mock this up to get us the points where we need to know exactly where to trim. So using these kind of alignment tabs from the factory is a great way to kind of just hold this in place. Now when we mock up our fascia, I have a chalk marker here to make lines of where we need to trim. So what we're kind of looking for is our safety chain loops are going to go through this portion of the grill. Our 6-pole's obviously in the way, and our breakaway switch, we can bend that tab up if we need to. So we're going to make these cuts, and then as we draw it back, it'll get us closer to where our arms go in, and we can make those as well. But you might want to take a few different times to mock it up and cut it. You can always cut more, so start small, get that clearance, and as we draw it in, it should get cleaner as we go. So I got this to drop in. Our breakaway switch actually fit perfectly here. So cutting out the center section for the 6-pole definitely helps unless you're attaching it afterward, which can get a little bit tricky. So that leaves us to be able to draw this back and look exactly where we need to cut out for our removable arms. So again, I'm just gonna go ahead, I'm gonna make the cuts. You also wanna make sure that you have enough room to be able to use the pins. So have your arms handy, and once you cut this out, just kind of test to make sure that it works. And then you may have to make a few little modifications as you go, but as you can see, that kind of allows us to get in here. I'm going to trim back a little bit more and then test my arms, but go ahead, get that cut out on both sides. Now once we're happy and everything's working properly, we can go ahead and get our fascia reinstalled just in the reverse order that we took it off. Now make sure you get your electrical connections put back in place on the fascia. And that was a look and installation of the Blue Ox base plate on a 2024 Chevy Equinox.